This is a First Coast News special report.
This is an awesome time to be an astronaut.
Our country has been through a lot. This is a unique moment. Launch American astronauts on American rockets from American soil. All of America can take a moment and look at our country do something stunning again.
And right now we are coming on the air with the countdown to history. And you, my friends, are looking live at the launch pad at Cape Canaveral, where American astronauts are set to launch from U.S. soil for the first time in nearly a decade. And we are less than 22 minutes to the scheduled liftoff. Now, this will be the first commercial manned mission leading the way for everyday people to one day, hopefully soon, be able to travel into space. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on this special day for our country, for our state, and for the Space Coast. I'm Heather Crawford, live in Cape Canaveral, and over my shoulder in the distance, that is Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center, where the countdown right now is on to making history. Now, SpaceX is going to try this afternoon for the second time this week to launch two astronauts, American astronauts, into space aboard the SpaceX's reusable rocket, the Falcon 9 rocket, in a Dragon crew, a Crew Dragon, becoming the first private company ever to fly humans into orbit. Now, the weather led to the launch being scrubbed on Wednesday, just about 15 minutes before liftoff. And so the question now is, will the weather cooperate this time around? And I can tell you from where I'm standing right here in Cape Canaveral, the sun is shining. It is windy, but it looks like at this point the weather is going to cooperate. So we're going to check in with our storm expert coming up in just a moment.
And liftoff, the final liftoff of Atlantis.
So it has been nearly a decade since Americans last lifted off from U.S. soil on an American rocket. And this is video from that last launch on Space Shuttle Atlantis. That was in July of 2011. Ever since, the U.S. has been paying Russia millions and millions of dollars to ferry U.S. astronauts to the space station. So what has led up to get us to this historic day? Well, following that space shuttle launch in 2011, 3 years later, it was September 2014, when NASA selected SpaceX and Boeing to each build a new spacecraft to carry astronauts to the International Space Station. Now, in August of 2018, NASA introduced the 9 lucky astronauts who would fly on the first test flight and mission for SpaceX and for Boeing's commercial spacecraft. Now, in March of last year, the Demo 1 flight launched SpaceX's first Crew Dragon to the ISS. Now, this has been a long time coming for SpaceX, years in the making. So how is it all supposed to work? Well, look at this video of that demonstration in March of last year, the Falcon 9 launching an empty Dragon capsule to demonstrate what this mission should look like. With hundreds of workers in mission control looking on, a rocket launched into the sky, only that time it was at night. Stunning images of the rocket lighting up the sky. The rocket, you see, then separates from the spacecraft, which was empty then, but today will hold 2 astronauts. And as the astronauts will continue on their journey towards the International Space Station, that reusable Falcon 9 rocket will then come back into our Earth's atmosphere and toward Earth once again. If all goes as planned today, about 10 minutes after the launch, that rocket will come back down to Earth, eventually landing on a barge in the Atlantic Ocean about 250 miles off the coast of Florida, and then be brought back to where I'm standing here in Port Canaveral. Now, the next day, the spacecraft containing the astronauts is expected to dock with the space station. That mission, 14 months ago, considered to be a huge success, leading to today's historic launch, a success that everyone is hoping to repeat today as well. So who are the 2 men, the 2 astronauts right now strapped in to the Crew Dragon? 2 veteran astronauts, 49-year-old Bob Behnken and 53-year-old Doug Hurley. Bob and Doug both work for NASA. They've worked closely with SpaceX for years now, training for this mission. And they are both married to astronauts and each has a young son. One's 10 years old, the other's 6 years old, hoping to watch their dads launch into orbit today. Now, both of these astronauts began their careers as military test pilots, and they have both previously been to space 2 different times. So this time around, they could spend anywhere from 1 to 3 months in space, and they say they are thrilled to be making history today.
I expect us to have a little bit of excitement going into the mission, but also tempered with a kind of an extreme focus on being able to execute the things that are in front of us. And you know, that folks often talk about, are you afraid of the mission? Are you afraid to ride a rocket or things like that? I think in our experience, we're actually most afraid of making a mistake and kind of taking away the progress or the success of the mission from the folks that have worked so hard to make it possible.
And leading up today, they have definitely been cool, calm, and collected, focused on the mission at hand. Now, the 2 astronauts preparing for their big day with a dress rehearsal at the Kennedy Space Center last weekend. They spent the day running through simulations while wearing that state-of-the-art sleek space suit and sitting back in similar suits that they are aboard right now, the spacecraft. So the astronauts and crew members making sure that every minute detail is just meticulously perfect. They greeted the media while in their spacesuits. They were transported across the port, of course, using Tesla cars. That's because the head of SpaceX is Elon Musk, who is also the co-founder of Tesla. Now, the astronauts then gave a test run inside a simulated spacecraft as well to go over every detail before today's launch. Now, this mission is aimed at testing the viability of the SpaceX crew transportation system, and it is the final test before the system can be certified for regular commercial crew flights. So basically, this launch today, this could change the way that we travel into space from now on. Now, the question we've all been asking is, could Mother Nature delay today's launch? When I woke up this morning, there was a 50% probability that weather would play a role and lead it to being delayed until tomorrow. We know it was scrubbed on Wednesday because of weather, but fingers crossed it is going to go off as expected today. With the latest on the forecast here, let's send it over to meteorologist Lauren Routenkrantz. Lauren, I know you've been keeping a close eye on the skies.
Hey there, Heather. Indeed, we have been really focused, of course, on Cape Canaveral very specifically because we've got that sea breeze that's coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. And so what that means is we've got a lot of moisture, a lot of juice in the atmosphere, similar to what we had on Wednesday. But actually, things are looking better, at least in my opinion. And I'll tell you why. At least from yesterday, I think, or at least from Wednesday, things are looking a bit clearer, especially as far as cloud coverage goes right now. We've got a nice little window where the rain and the storms have moved to the southeast, and actually the clouds have begun to clear as well. So let's just go ahead and take a look at that Melbourne radar loop, and you can see that, I mean, as far as the rain goes, they are okay. They've got a couple of showers that are moving over Titusville, but those are going to continue to push toward the south of where the Kennedy Space Center is. As far as the radar goes, and you can see the visible satellite here, obviously the bright white are those cumulus clouds. We've got some towering cumulus clouds, but what they really want to avoid are those anvil clouds. When we get those towering thunderstorms and then they reach the top of the troposphere, top or bottom of the stratosphere, they start to spread out and really cause an issue for flights. So right now you can see that there's actually that dark, that gray area across the Cape Canaveral area, specifically the northern side where I've got that red dot where the rocket will be launching. And so that's good. If we can keep that holding, this is going to be a go. Now, of course, weather is really dicey. We've got some clouds out in the distance as well. So a lot of things are going to continue to, you know, be looked at here. And really with just about 30 seconds left in the countdown, they can cancel this thing because of the weather, and we'd want to rather stay on the ground if it doesn't look like it's going to be safe. Now, the Titusville time lapse, this is just 10 miles west of where the Kennedy Space Center is, so where a couple of those showers were rolling through, but I can tell you in the last couple of hours, things have looked much clearer. Let's go ahead and take a look at this futurecast here because we can see just minute by minute how critical this is really going to be with the showers to the south, and then again, showers building out toward the west into the afternoon, but the thunder and the lightning will be key as well because when we get those towering cumulus clouds, we get those water droplets and the ice particles, and when there's friction in those clouds, that's when we can see the lightning as well. So again, keeping a close eye on this. I'm really keeping my fingers crossed, all my fingers crossed that we have this go off successfully. As of now, Heather, things are looking good but we'll continue to, of course, monitor the weather and keep an eye on the official word from NASA and SpaceX.
As scheduled at 3:22 this afternoon. Lauren, thank you so much. Now, today's mission is officially known as Demo 2. So this is the first manned flight of the Crew Dragon. It is the final major test for SpaceX's human spaceflight system. It's not been decided yet just how long the two astronauts will stay at the International Space Station. While the Crew Dragon being used for this flight tests can stay in orbit for about 110 days. NASA says the specific mission duration is going to be determined based on the readiness of the next commercial crew launch. And I want to point out that the launch pad being used today, it is the same one that sent Apollo 11 to the moon 50 years ago. As Alex Osiris reports today, former NASA engineer, the one you're about to meet, has some very special ties and memories of that flight, and he's using his knowledge now to inspire the next generation of scientists.
To see the evolution of where we are and where we've been and where we are today, I mean.
Frank Robinson had a decorated 30-year career at NASA. He worked on the space station redesign team, met astronauts Neil Armstrong, first man to walk on the moon, and Guy Bluford, space shuttle mission specialist and first African-American in space. Robinson's focus on safety and science presented a new opportunity after retirement, now working with the next generation, teaching through STEM to Hub.
We try to make science, technology, engineering, math, and medicine fun for the kids.
One of the groups he works with, Girl Scouts of Gateway Council, which is how we met May Trog and Melanie Wondrasek. Both studied at NASA's Goddard Center and have established an astronomy club.
It was an interesting experience. It was a lot of seminars, but it was also interesting to actually get to go around the facility. We actually got to see part of the James Webb telescope.
Wondrasek, who wants to lead teams in mission control one day, says the Demo 2 flight could open a lot of possibilities for future space exploration.
Big time funding to come in if we really want to get to Mars, which is what keeps delaying us back. And so I really want to see all the private companies start to work together with NASA.
Reporting, Alex Osiris, First Coast News, on your side.
You know, if this launch goes as planned today, the astronauts will spend about 19 hours orbiting the Earth before trying to rendezvous and dock at the International Space Station sometime around 10:30 tomorrow morning. And this mission is the culmination of 6 years of work on this new spacecraft. NASA officials say they want to help expand the economy in low Earth orbit, paving the way for other customers of commercial space exploration.
This is a unique opportunity to bring all of America together in one moment in time and say, look at how bright the future is. That's what this launch is all about. And yes, in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, we've taken extraordinary measures to keep our people safe.
So we are now just minutes away from this historic launch. So you may be wondering, what has the day been like as the astronauts try for the second time this week to launch into orbit from Kennedy Space Center? So I want to break down for you what it has been like for them. So 6 hours before the scheduled liftoff today, the two astronauts woke up, not because they're late sleepers, but it's so that their sleep cycles will line up when they arrive at the International Space Station, hopefully tomorrow morning. Now, they had breakfast, they got some exercise, then they put on those sleek, state-of-the-art spacesuits. And they're doing this in that same room used by the astronauts to suit up since the Apollo missions. Now, then appropriately, since they're working with Elon Musk's SpaceX company, they hopped into a Tesla to get to the launch pad. About 2 hours ago, they took the ride up in an elevator to the Dragon capsule, where the crew sealed them safely inside the cockpit, where they are strapped in, ready to go right now. 45 minutes prior to launch, a poll starts to make sure that all the crew involved are ready. Then 30 to 35 minutes out, the fueling process begins with those astronauts on board. Liftoff is slated for 3:22 this afternoon. And if there are any technical or weather delays, we'll get a chance to do this all over again tomorrow afternoon. So as I mentioned, the launch scheduled for 3:22. It can't be 3:21. It can't be 3:23. It has to be specifically 3:22. And so have you ever wondered why situations like this, the launch window is so specific? Katie Jeffries is here now to explain.
Okay, so if the mission of the launch is to head to a specific point in space or to meet up with a moving object in space like the moon or, say, the International Space Station, which is traveling around 17,000 miles per hour, you have to make very specific calculations to meet up using the least amount of fuel and time. So think of it this way. You're standing in the center of the infield of an athletic track, and you want to catch someone who's running around that track. You wouldn't just randomly start walking toward the track. Instead, the best way to save time and energy is to walk toward the track at the spot you estimate they will be when you get there. Now, if that estimation is off, they could just simply run by, and you'd have to wait for them to come back around again. The same applies when trying to rendezvous with the space station. There are precise calculations made based on a ton of factors that all lead to a single launch time. Now, if the mission destination is not based on another moving object, like delivering a satellite to lower Earth orbit, the launch window can be longer, allowing for system and weather delays.
And that, of course, was not Katie Jeffries, but that is an explanation for you. And so it's important not to lose sight that today's launch really will set the stage for future space exploration. That means potential commercial space travel beyond the International Space Station. We're talking about maybe to the moon, maybe even further than that.
Remember, this is a test flight. The highest priority is to test the vehicle and get it home safely, and then be prepared to launch Crew 1. And we are proving out a business model, a public-private partnership business model that ultimately will enable us to go to the moon, this time sustainably. In other words, we're going to go to the moon to stay.
And space travel is dangerous. The Crew Dragon mission has about a 1 in 270 chance of catastrophic failure. But there is an emergency plan should one arise. In January, SpaceX successfully completed an in-flight test of Crew Dragon's launch space escape capabilities. Now, this test did not have NASA scientists on board the spacecraft, but it really showed the company's ability to carry the crew to safety in the event of an emergency shortly after launch. And that capsule safely splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean, where teams were able to successfully recover it. So the success of this mission really could be a huge step forward for our nation's security. I had a chance to talk about that when I went one-on-one with the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, when he was in Jacksonville on Tuesday. He was on the First Coast touring a local fire station to talk about a grant to help first responders during the pandemic. And now he's scheduled to be here today with President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence to watch this historic launch. And I asked him what it means to see for Homeland Security to see success with this mission.
We'll continue to be COVID tested as we lead up to launch, because we, of course, don't want to take that to the international.
And so, as you know, this launch is coming while our nation is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Astronauts, they've always gone into quarantine prior to launching into space as a precaution. But with this coronavirus, this has made preparations for this mission even more unique for the astronauts.
We'll continue to be COVID tested as we lead up to launch, because we, of course, don't want to take that to the International Space Station. But you know, where there's a will, there's a way, and there's been will to make this happen, and we're just proud to be a part of it. It's the normal quarantine that astronauts go through about 2 weeks prior to launch to really ensure that we don't take anything to the International Space Station or get the crew on orbit sick or be sick when we get on orbit. We've had to kind of stretch out and kind of begin closer to 10 weeks prior, frankly, which has been a little bit of a difference, but it's actually been kind of nice that all of our families were kind of going through that same experience, and so we're kind of all on the same page in terms of how to operate it.
And so now we are just minutes away from this historic launch. And when you talk about launching a spacecraft from U.S. soil with Americans on board, it really unifies our country at a time that we really need it. Robert Bradfield is continuing our live team coverage. Robert, I know you grew up here in Brevard County. You know how important these launches are to the Space Coast. And after more than almost nearly a decade, seeing it happen again, driving in today, I just saw the streets lined, people excited, eager to watch this liftoff happen today.
Yeah, my heart's beating here. I'm a little shaking as well because I'm from Brevard County, as you mentioned, and I've seen a lot of shuttle launches. But this, of course, really the next chapter here for the space missions here in Brevard County. Take a look, though. I want to show you some of the crowds. Some of these people actually arrived here yesterday. A friend of mine sent me pictures of people camping out yesterday afternoon. He said people were already along US 1, which you see here, finding their spots. Brevard County Public Schools, interestingly enough, though, their last day of classes was on Thursday, so considering that classes ended and this is a weekend, of course, you can expect large crowds. Now, when my photographer and I got here around 9:30 this morning, we saw more of the main roads blocked. The traffic really was at a crawl, much slower, we can tell you, than Wednesday. I did notice that there were a lot more people here in Titusville as well. Many were also here on Wednesday, and one man telling me he would not miss this, considering he wanted to be part of witnessing history. Another man who lives in Palatka says he and his wife decided to drive down. This is his first launch, he says, he's seeing in person.
Falcon 9 rocket is scheduled to lift off just moments from now from the Kennedy Space Center, carrying 2 astronauts to the International Space Station. President Trump has returned to Florida today to watch it happen. Tom Costello has been following all this and has more from the Kennedy Space Center on this truly historic day. Tom?
It is indeed. 2 American lives are on the line here. Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken are the 2 astronauts strapped into that SpaceX rocket behind me on the historic launch pad 39A, taking off at 3:22 Eastern Time. 9 Merlin rockets will ignite, lifting the Falcon 9 rocket up to the space station as they accelerate on 1.7 million pounds of thrust. This is a very big deal for all the reasons that you just outlined, and we're now about to go to SpaceX Mission Control. 45 seconds until the final liftoff. Important to note here, this is a SpaceX mission, a private company's mission with NASA astronauts on board. Mission control is outside of the Kennedy Space Center. It's actually in California. So far, it's been a very smooth countdown, despite the fact that we had bad weather on Wednesday, and we're now down to T-minus 30 seconds and counting here, Jose, as we listen into the final countdown with SpaceX Mission Control. A key word to listen for as we go into this final launch is that maximum Q, max Q, you will hear at 58 seconds into the launch, and that is when they have the maximum loads on the spacecraft. Here we go.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
America has launched, and so rises a new era of American spaceflight, and with it the ambitions of a new generation continuing the dream. 20 seconds into flight, stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
T plus 30 seconds into this historic mission. Flying crew on board Dragon and Falcon 9, and look at them go.
Falcon power telemetry nominal.
M1D throttle down.
We're throttling down to get ready for the period of maximum dynamic pressure. We're in the throttle bucket. Reports say all systems are go.
Vehicle is supersonic.
We've exceeded Mach 1 on the Falcon 9.
M1D throttle up.
We're throttling back up to full power as we're through max Q.
Copy, 1 Bravo.
And we heard that 1 Bravo call out. That's just the second abort zone that they're in. They'll continue to be on this until the first stage has done its job and they switch over to the second. At this point, Bob and Doug pulling about 2.3 Gs, 2.3 times the Earth's gravity, already moving at over 1,500 miles per hour.
We've heard the call out for
17,000 miles per hour. Listen, this has been a spectacular liftoff so far. It really harkens back to the Apollo days with the thunder and the roar and the buildings here at the Kennedy Space Center rumbling. Watch that countdown clock at 2 minutes and 38 seconds. MECO, main engine cutoff. That's going to be a critical moment as we listen into SpaceX.
Astronauts into orbit. Coming up in about 20 seconds.
M1D throttle down.
We heard we're throttling down the Merlin engines on the first stage. And we have Miko.
Miko.
2 Alpha. Falcon stage separation confirmed.
Copy 2 Alpha. Critical moment there, Miko. Main engine cutoff from the first stage of the rocket now separating, allowing the second stage to continue along with the Dragon at 17,000 miles per hour, headed for the International Space Station. Jose, this could not have gone better. It has been absolutely picture perfect so far. They've got a 19-hour journey to the space station.
Unbelievable is the word that comes to mind, Tom Costello. Thank you very much. And joining us from Houston, astronaut Michael Fink. Michael, it seems like we've seen some of these images before, but it's all so different and new.
It is new. This is a new rocket to launch people on. We've been working with SpaceX for a long time, NASA, the Air Force. We count on the Falcon 9. We still got second stage to get us into orbit. We're going to get to 17,500 miles an hour, 26,000 kilometers per hour, and it's exciting. Doug and Bob, they're in a surreal thing, just saying, I can't believe this is happening. And wow, the weather, right? So this is a great day, historic launch, and we're really happy so far. These guys will get to orbit, and then tomorrow they'll dock to the space station. They're going to be up for, they're going to be able to sleep in between time, take off their suits. It's going to be an interesting ride for them, and we're wishing them the best of luck.
It is indeed 250 miles up above Earth at International Space Station. And speaking about weather, Al Roker's been keeping a close eye on it. Al, you know, this had to be scrubbed one time before. Earlier today, it looked like it was touch and go, but seems like the weather held up.
It did, and just barely, Jose. I mean, the idea of course, the problems that they could have had. Take a look. You can see there are lightning strikes all around, but as we zoom in closely and then go to the live radar, you can see just to the west of Launch Pad 39A, we've got some thunderstorms. Well, look at this. It's basically, they need a 12-mile radius. They do not launch if lightning is observed within 12 miles. Well, that one lightning strike area is just about 14 miles away. Thunderstorm anvil clouds within 12 miles, they didn't have that. And the clouds containing moderate or heavy precipitation didn't have that. So weather cooperated. No worries about tomorrow because they are off and away, Jose.
Thank you, Al. And Tom Costello, what can we expect going forward now?
Docking with the International Space Station tomorrow morning. Again, it's a 19-hour journey. And here's what's really fascinating. They don't know how long this mission will last. It could be 1 to 4 months. That depends on how well this rocket shakes out, how well the spacecraft shakes out, how well the rocket performs, how well it docks with the International Space Station. But this is all part of the plan now to turn this part of NASA's mission, getting to low Earth orbit, turn that over to the private sector, like SpaceX, like Boeing, while NASA focuses on going long and deep. In other words, back to the moon and to Mars eventually. That could be 4 years away at the earliest, could be longer than that to get to the moon and then to Mars. But listen, that's the ultimate mission now of NASA. So to have this under its belt, this picture-perfect launch with a private company, SpaceX, performing so far right on the dot, and with 2 American lives on the line, this could not have gone better today.
Tom Costello, thank you very much. American astronauts now on their way to that International Space Station on this historic flight. We'll have full details tonight on NBC Nightly News, as well as complete coverage of the protests across the country following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis on Monday while in police custody. I'm Jose Diaz-Balart reporting.
And welcome back to our live coverage from Cape Canaveral, where you just saw history in the making. I have to tell you, I have chills just being here, seeing that Falcon 9 rocket with the Crew Dragon atop it launch into orbit was spectacular. We heard the loud roaring of the rockets going up, and you just heard cheers erupt as this launch liftoff a success as the 2 astronauts, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, now make their way on a roughly 19-hour journey to the International Space Station. Now, that is where they are scheduled to dock tomorrow morning at around 10:30. And this launch is all a test. This is the last test needed for NASA to certify this SpaceX spacecraft for humans to start exploring, going up back and forth to the International Space Station. So history made here today. It is very exciting. The launch on Wednesday was postponed until today because of the weather, but the clouds cleared, the weather cooperated, and now we have 2 American astronauts, the first 2 Americans launched from American soil on an American spacecraft in almost a decade, heading to space, the first time ever on a private spacecraft. So a very, very exciting day for the Space Coast and an exciting day for our entire country. We are going to have more live team coverage from Cape Canaveral starting at 6 o'clock on First Coast News, but now I want to send it in to Jeannie Blaylock. Jeannie?